Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. The city of Greenville was, on the surface, a quiet community where the cobblestone streets and immaculate facades of its bourgeois homes painted a picture of perfect order. But beneath this smooth surface, a much darker reality simmered. Systemic racism and ancestral prejudices seeped into institutions like an invisible but corrosive poison. At the heart of this system was Danielle Monroe, a black woman in her 40s, respected for her intelligence, her rectitude, and her commitment to justice. She had risen through the ranks of the law with unwavering determination, breaking down the barriers and stereotypes that tried to limit her. Today, she was a Superior Court judge in Greenville, a position that gave her considerable power, but also a target. For several months, a discreet but rigorous investigation had been launched against certain city police officers, accused of discriminatory practices and abuse of power. Among them were officers Mark Collins and Eric Reynolds, known for their arrogance and contempt for residents of black neighborhoods. These two men were unaware that the justice they were trampling on was embodied by the very woman they were about to arrest. That evening, under a heavy, threatening sky, Danielle Monroe's path would intersect with Collins and Reynolds in a way no one had predicted. The violent and humiliating arrest that would follow would not only be a personal affront, but the trigger for a legal and moral battle that would call into question an entire system. Because sometimes power is found where you least expect it, and the truth always comes out, even behind the bars of injustice. Danielle Monroe drove slowly down Maple Street, the road leading home after a tiring day in court. The orange light from the streetlights struggled to pierce the approaching darkness, and the cool wind rustled the dead leaves. She could feel the weight of the case files on her mind. Again, that racial discrimination case she was due to try tomorrow. She stopped at a red light, absent-mindedly scanning her phone for an urgent message from her assistant. Unknowingly, she crossed the stop line a fraction of a second as the light turned amber, and that's when the patrol car, an old white cruiser with the Greenville Police logo on it, suddenly turned behind her with its emergency lights flashing. "Stop your vehicle, madam," an authoritative voice called out. Danielle calmly placed her hand on the steering wheel and parked the car on the shoulder. Two officers quickly got out. The first, Mark Collins, a man in his 30s with a hard stare and a closed face, approached the window. The second, Eric Reynolds, younger and with a smirk, trailed behind him. "Ma'am, you've gone through the red light," Collins said, without even a hint of politeness. Danielle, remaining calm, took out her driver's license. She knew that revealing her status as a judge at this moment would risk triggering more hostility, so she preferred to simply present herself as a law-abiding citizen. "Here's my license," she said calmly. Collins took a quick look at the document. "I'll have to check this at the station. You'll have to follow us." Danielle frowned. That imperative tone didn't appeal to her. "For what reason exactly?" she asked, trying to remain polite but firm. "Non-negotiable, madam. It's the procedure." Reynolds then approached, raising his voice to intimidate. "You think you can lecture us? Just because you're dressed like a respectable lady doesn't mean we're going to let you." Danielle felt a cold anger rise within her, but she kept her dignity. "I'm not trying to be disrespectful. I just want to understand why you're arresting me," she replied calmly. Suddenly, Collins grabbed the car door and tried to open it. Danielle stepped back in surprise, then realized they were trying to physically restrain her. "Don't touch my vehicle," she said firmly. The tension mounted within seconds. Reynolds suddenly stepped forward, grabbed Danielle's arm, and tried to pull her out of the car. "Let go of me," she exclaimed, struggling violently. But the two police officers, convinced of their authority, acted brutally. They dragged her out of the car under the shocked gaze of passers-by who had stopped. Danielle, accustomed to legal battles, had never imagined being treated like this in her own city, and even less so by those supposed to protect the law. The handcuffs snapped on her wrists, depriving her of her freedom but not of her resolve. "I'm a Greenville Superior Court judge," she declared loudly, hoping the title would command respect and stop the unjustified violence. Collins burst out laughing bitterly. "We'll see what the courts have to say about you, Madam Judge." It was the beginning of a confrontation that would shake the entire city. The patrol car's flashing lights blazed through the night, casting red and blue flashes across the silent facades of Riverside. Danielle Monroe, handcuffed and escorted to the station, felt every stare bearing down on her, some filled with suspicion, others with shame or curiosity. She held her head high, her mind already formulating what to do next, aware that this arrest went far beyond a simple traffic violation. The atmosphere at the police station was tense. Confidently, Collins and Reynolds wrote their report, emphasizing Danielle's supposedly suspicious behavior, describing her as arrogant and uncooperative. There was no mention of her title or the brutality of the arrest. In the interrogation room, Danielle was asked a series of repetitive questions. She answered calmly, stating the facts without ever losing her composure. She knew that every word could be used to defend her dignity and reveal the truth. Meanwhile, in court, news of Judge Monroe's arrest spread like wildfire. Her assistant, Jessica Harper, panicked and tried to contact Danielle without success. Attorney General David Langston, a longtime friend and staunch ally of Danielle, was quickly informed. "This is a monumental mistake," Langston said, his voice tight. "We're going to do everything we can to get the truth out." In the media, social media erupted. Some defended Danielle, denouncing a manifestly arbitrary arrest, while others expressed skepticism tinged with prejudice. The debate was launched, highlighting the deep fractures in society. For Collins and Reynolds, the mere fact of arresting a black judge didn't seem to worry them. Their persistent arrogance masked an underlying fear of exposure. They were unaware that this arrest would trigger an investigation that would bring their conduct into the open. For her part, Danielle, in her cell, reflected. Her role as a judge required her to remain impartial, but now she was a stakeholder. This painful experience would give her new strength to fight systemic racism, not only in the city, but also within the justice system itself. That evening, in the silence of her cell, Danielle Monroe made a decision that would change the course of her life, and that of Greenville. The day after the arrest, Danielle Monroe's office was filled with a heavy silence. Her assistant, Jessica Harper, a methodical and loyal young woman, frantically typed away at her computer, searching for information and preparing the first elements for the defense. "Danielle can't fight this battle alone," she repeated over and over, her throat tight. At the same time, in an adjacent office, Attorney General David Langston was quietly gathering his advisors. He knew that this case was more than a simple traffic incident. It was a symbol, a test for Greenville's entire justice system. "We must act quickly," David insisted, his gaze burning with fierce determination. "If this arrest goes unpunished, the entire credibility of justice is at stake." David contacted Sarah Collins, a well-known civil rights lawyer known for her tenacity and rigor. "Sarah, I want you to take this case. Danielle Monroe deserves a flawless defense. We will attack this arrest on all fronts." Sarah accepted without hesitation. For her, this case was more than just a legal matter. It was a battle against the latent racism that was plaguing society. Meanwhile, the tone was quite different for police officers Mark Collins and Eric Reynolds. Sensing the impending media storm, the two men exchanged heavy glances. "We should have thought before arresting him," Reynolds muttered, fear mixed with arrogance. Collins replied curtly, "It's too late now. We're sticking to our guns. If it goes wrong, we play the authority card." But deep down, Collins was beginning to doubt himself. He remembered Danielle's cold, determined gaze when she revealed her identity. That gaze, more than anything, betrayed that she was no ordinary citizen. The battle had just begun, but everyone knew the stakes were immense. In the hushed offices of Collins and Harper, Sarah Collins and Jessica Harper worked furiously, transforming every detail of Danielle Monroe's arrest into a crucial piece of a complex puzzle. The case file was meticulously compiled, bystander testimonies, surveillance videos, medical reports attesting to the marks left by police brutality, and most importantly, the audio recording of their interactions with the officers. Sarah insisted on the need to demonstrate the systemic injustice behind the isolated act of these police officers. "This isn't just a case of overzealousness," she explained to Danielle during a confidential meeting. "This is a clear message to all Black people in this city. You are not respected, even at the highest levels of justice." Danielle, though devastated, drew on her usual resilience. She wanted this procedure to serve as a change, not just for herself, but for the entire community. Meanwhile, tensions were rising within the police department. The internal investigation was launched at the express request of the police chief, a man keen to preserve the integrity of the force and calm tensions. Captain William Harris, a straightforward and pragmatic man, was appointed to oversee the investigation. "We must act quickly, but rigorously," he said at the first meeting. "If the accusations are true, justice must be done, but without bringing shame on the entire police force." The interrogations of Collins and Reynolds were direct and tense. Collins denied any brutality, justifying the arrest by what he called a legitimate suspicion. Reynolds, more nervous, eventually admitted to a certain pressure he felt to maintain order at all costs, revealing a toxic internal climate where racism, often tacit, was rife among some officers. Anonymous testimonies began to filter through, evoking similar behavior by other police officers, reinforcing the theory of a systemic problem. Meanwhile, the city began to organize. Civil rights groups called for peaceful protests outside the courthouse, while public debates erupted on social media and in the media. For Danielle, this legal preparation and this investigation were two fronts in the same war, that of justice against injustice, of truth against silence. The following weeks were marked by palpable tension in Greenville. In the halls of the courthouse, the Danielle Monroe case was quickly becoming a landmark case, closely watched by the local and national press. Inside the courtroom, the defense team led by Sarah Collins was refining each argument, anticipating the strategies of the defense attorneys who would represent officers Collins and Reynolds. Danielle, although accustomed to the rigors of the courts, felt the immense weight of the upcoming battle. Her dignity, her integrity, and the reputation of the justice system were now on the line. The day before the first hearing, Sarah brings the whole team together. "We are not just here to defend Danielle," she said forcefully. "We are the voices of all those who have experienced discrimination and abuse. Every testimony, every piece of evidence, counts." On the day of the hearing, the courtroom was packed. Journalists, activists, and Greenville residents, some in support of Danielle, others intrigued, even skeptical, filled the pews. The judge in charge of the case, a white man in his 50s named Harold Whitman, opened the session solemnly. Defense attorneys attempted to attack Danielle's credibility, emphasizing the notion of due process and downplaying the seriousness of the charges. But Sarah, calmly and rigorously, presented the damning evidence. Videos showing the brutality of the police, testimonies from passers-by who had witnessed the arrest, and above all, the disciplinary precedents of the incriminated officers. Attorney General David Langston gave an impassioned speech, highlighting the historic significance of the case. This case goes beyond a simple arrest. It touches the very soul of our justice system. If we turn a blind eye to what happened, we betray the fundamental principles of equality and respect. The first hearings were tense, punctuated by moments of emotion, raised voices, and meaningful silences. Danielle, observing the room, felt a mixture of hope and apprehension. Outside the courthouse, the mobilization grew. Peaceful protests brought together hundreds of people, holding signs with slogans such as "Justice for Danielle" and "End Racism in the Police." This affair had awakened an entire city, revealing the cracks in a system in search of reform. The following sessions opened in an increasingly electric atmosphere. The courtroom, already packed from the first day, now welcomed journalists, activists, and citizens who came to show their support or simply to witness what promised to be a historic trial. Sarah Collins, for her part, displayed all her mastery of the law and her passion for justice. She called several key witnesses, bystanders, experts in police procedure, but above all, she presented irrefutable evidence. One of the most notable moments was the release of video taken from a nearby business's surveillance camera, which clearly showed Officer Reynolds roughly pushing Danielle against the door of her car before she was handcuffed. The murmur in the room rose. Some covered their mouths in disbelief, others frowned, taken aback. Then came the testimony of a former colleague of the police, an officer named Marcus Bradley, who chose to break his silence. "I've seen this kind of behavior too many times," he confessed, his voice shaky but determined. "The pressure to stop at all costs, often on flimsy pretexts, is constant. It's not just a mistake, it's a broken system." This testimony had the effect of a bombshell. Collins and Reynolds, hitherto arrogant, saw their defense falter. The officer's lawyer tried to downplay the allegations, arguing that the officers were exaggerated and had simply been doing their jobs. But District Attorney David Langston vehemently denounced a denial of reality and a toxic culture within the Greenville Police. This trial is an opportunity to break this vicious cycle, he told the court. Not just for Danielle Monroe, but for every citizen who has been a victim of injustice. Judge Whitman, usually reserved, displayed a serious tone for the first time. She ordered that the internal investigation be made public, imposing a transparency rarely granted. The revelation of the officers' disciplinary records came as a shock. Collins had several complaints of abuse that were never seriously punished, while Reynolds appeared in several reports for aggressive behavior. In the audience, the murmurs turned into a collective murmur, a low rumble of indignation. At the end of the day, Danielle, despite her fatigue, felt victory approaching. This trial was no longer just hers. It had become a collective fight, a light in the heart of darkness. After several weeks of heated hearings, the day of the verdict had finally arrived. The courtroom was filled with palpable tension, every eye fixed on the jury charged with deciding the fate of Collins and Reynolds. Danielle Monroe, despite the fatigue and pressure, displayed a calm serenity, the result of her unwavering determination. At her side, Sarah Collins, David Langston, and Jessica Harper formed a united front, ready to face the outcome of this legal battle. The jurors, after intense deliberation, finally returned. The jury foreman spoke. After careful consideration of the evidence, testimony, and arguments of the parties, we find officers Mark Collins and Eric Reynolds guilty of abuse of authority and wrongful arrest. A murmur of emotion rippled through the room. Some burst into applause, others shed tears. Danielle felt a wave of relief and justice finally served. As they left the courtroom, officers Collins and Reynolds faced contrasting reactions. Collins, his expression grim, appeared consumed by anger and shame, while Reynolds avoided the gaze of reporters, appearing distraught. In a rare moment of candor, Reynolds whispered to Collins, "I never wanted this. But we were caught in a system we didn't control." Collins bitterly replied, "This system has used us as scapegoats, but we are also responsible." Within the police department, the verdict sent shockwaves. Chief William Harris announced tougher disciplinary measures and mandatory training on civil rights and dealing with institutional racism. Danielle, for her part, received an outpouring of support from the community. Local leaders, activists, and citizens came to congratulate her, seeing her as a symbol of courage and change. But she knew there was still a long way to go. This trial was just the first step in a broader fight against injustice and discrimination. Several months had passed since the landmark verdict in Greenville. Danielle Monroe, now recognized not only as a judge, but also as a symbol of the fight against systemic racism, continued her work with renewed energy. The police department had begun a slow but tangible transformation. Under public and judicial pressure, training programs on diversity, conflict management, and awareness of institutional racism had been implemented. Several officers, including Collins and Reynolds, had been disciplined or reassigned, while more transparent oversight mechanisms had been put in place. In the community, a sincere dialogue had begun. Local organizations, supported by Danielle and other leaders, were working to rebuild trust between citizens and law enforcement. Public forums, educational workshops, and awareness campaigns had emerged, uniting previously divided voices. For Danielle, this personal struggle paved the way for a broader mission. She became an influential voice at the national level, advising on policies aimed at eradicating discrimination within the justice and police systems. Despite the scars left by this ordeal, Danielle remained hopeful. Her story, painful but victorious, had become a legacy for future generations. For justice, she often thought, is not a point of arrival, but a path to be traveled with courage, determination, and faith in humanity.